Gilbert Hernandez, along with his brothers Jaime and Mario, essentially created alternative comics as we know it. So thank you, Gilbert. And that was 30 years ago, so we're celebrating the 30th anniversary. And yeah, that would be the interesting thing, I think, about how you've chosen to celebrate the 30th anniversary is that you've returned to Palomar, which I assume everyone in here is pretty much familiar with, but it's a small town in, I always just say Central America. Does it have a, what country is Palomar in?
I started to say it was below the U.S. border just because logic would be there, but then I was ignoring some of the island countries, you know, the Caribbean and stuff, so I just like outside the U.S. border.
Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's based on, but it's just, I just know more about Mexico than anywhere else because that's where my folks are from. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty much it. But I still want it to be a fantasy. I still want it to be a projection for all the readers to place it where they want to. Right. That's why it's half the time it's a desert and the other time it's a tropical place, you know, depending on the, you know, what side of town they're on.
I was going to say, I just thought it was a different, you know, area of town.
Yeah, it actually is. I mean, there's a lot, in most of those countries, there's a lot of, you know, there's the beach side, and then you literally go past the jungle and there's a desert. You know, I mean, that's common there, so I was able to do that. But I just prefer to be wherever the hell you want it to be. Sweden, if you want.
Now, and you haven't been there in quite some time before this year's volume of Love and Rocket's New Stories. It's been a while since we visited Palomar, and I was curious why you left and why you returned.
Well, originally I left it because I thought I'd run out of new stories for the old characters, and I just didn't want to, you know, burn it out. I didn't want to become Charles Schulz in the '90s, except for his money. But, no, not to pick on Schulz, but you know, it was simply I had done those stories. I'd done all the crazy Luba stories. I'd done all the other character stories. And a lot of times, Jaime and I would shape our stories as to where the comic was going toward the end. Like toward the end of the magazine, we decided, you know, before the magazine ended, like 10 issues before, we thought, well, let's wrap this up and start doing different comics for a while. We didn't know if we were going to return to Love and Rockets or not. This is during the magazine, so we both decided just to make our stories end at the end of the magazine's run. That way, we'd have a nice package in case we never came back to it. You know, at least that was what I was thinking. And it was just, you know, it was just a time for a change, just a physical change, doing comic books instead of the magazine, and to do different kinds of stories. Like after Love and Rockets, the magazine wrapped up, I was done with Palomar, or so I thought. And you know, I just wanted to do different stuff, but once I took a break from it, I realized that's what it was, just a break, because then new stories started coming to me. So, but I didn't want to return to the town, even though there were certain characters that I could not replace. I could not replace Carmen and Adaclio. I couldn't replace Cello the Sheriff, especially those characters. The other ones I could move around, make them move around the U.S., and you know, use them in the Lubus comics that came later, because I could do that. But those characters just belonged in Palomar. So I had to make that decision. I'm not going to do these characters anymore, especially the sheriff and the couple. So, you know, I moved, you know, a lot of the characters to the U.S. just to have a different angle on the stories, just to give myself something else for them to do, you know. But there was always the nagging feeling of like, well, there are still Palomar stories there. I just don't know what they are, and there are still characters that I'd like to use, because it would just be really silly to just completely move the whole town to the U.S. And, you know, even though I was close to doing that with so many characters. And then when the decision that to stop doing the Love and Rockets, the comic book, and to turn it into the annual, we got 50 pages each. I had so much room to do what I couldn't do in the old comics. It was just if I wanted to do in a single issue a 40-page story, I could. That was something we could never do. It always had to be serialized. and we were never fast enough to make it the serials work that well, just because 3 issues of a comic book a year, and you're still on the same story, But having room in the New Love Rockets, I was just able to go back to Palomar just because I could, And I was about ready for it, but I wanted a different angle on it. So what I did was have a return to Palomar with a new character. A young Lupa's granddaughter goes to Palomar, but she wants to go to the Palomar we all knew. She wants to go back to the old one, like, this is what happened here, and this is what's here, and this is what... So it's almost like a parallel universe thing of where she's looking at Palomar as a story that she knew. Because it basically was. Her mother told her stories about Palomar, and she wants to go there and see it. Well, she goes to the reality of Palomar. I'm not spoiling anything here. And everybody says, they're like, oh, it's nothing. We lived it. And that's how it is in real life. When you live these certain things, it's a lot of times like, oh, we didn't know it was exotic. We were just living it, And she wants to see the classic Palomar. I want the Lupa's hammer. I want to see it. I want to see the ghost tree. I want to see all this stuff. But everybody's sort of casual about it, like, yeah, okay. So that's where it is right now. So I don't know where that's going to lead, going. But that was just like literally. I shaped a lot of my stories and bring back stuff and take them out for whatever format we're on. And right now we have so many pages that I'm able to just do that if I feel like it.
Did you have any temptation to sort of more thoroughly modernize Palomar in terms of just the amenities that they have, phones, TVs, or did you want to keep it sort of that place out of time?
Yeah, I wanted to keep Palomar exactly how it began. I mean, I have a little. I can't talk too much about it if you haven't seen the new issue, but there are slight changes, like, okay, one of them is, Palomar didn't have phones. Well, the technology has changed. People have cell phones now. People have, you don't need a wire across the town, to attach to a telephone wire to the next big city. If there's a tower nearby, So I mentioned that, but that's all I can say about it as far as Palomar becoming more modern. Now we have cell phones and Bluetooths and stuff, so it's about as sophisticated as it gets. So like they almost skipped over the whole phone thing. Yeah, they skipped over it.
The other thing that really kind of threw me for a loop, because I don't know who you all are, but when I get a new Love and Rockets, like that's it, drop everything, like it comes out of the envelope, and the envelope falls to the kitchen floor, and I stand and read. And it's not necessarily the best way to read something that requires a lot of attention. So when I first read through it, I kind of dove right in and really tore through the pages. And you did something interesting where you're sort of on parallel pages. You told the story of what's going on in the real Palomar, and then the story of a movie about Palomar, with the sort of fictionalized versions and combined versions of other characters, played by relatives in some cases of those characters. And in one particular case, something happened to one of those characters, and I had a heart attack. I was like, no! And like, and then I had to stop because I had to take care of my baby or something. And I put it aside, and it was one of those things where you're just walking around like a zombie, like, I can't believe that happened. And then I reread it, and I was like, oh, phew, because it was in the movie.
I see. Okay.
Yes.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
So yeah, you added another layer, because as you said, the real story is about this girl coming to her family's hometown and finding, and comparing the story she's been told with the reality of it. But then there's that extra level of an actual story, an actual fictional film made within the world of the town, about the town. And I was wondering why you chose to so, directly run those two together.
It's because I had two different stories that for me, they just didn't work alone for me, And it just was basically a brainstorm that just showed up like, oh, I know what I'll do. I'm going to return to Palomar, so I'll have, because I was going to do the story about the parallel movie, first. Then I decided to add the real Palomar into it just because I had extra pages, literally. And I just put them together and did it that way. And the only time you really know, and unless you catch it right away, is that the last page of the book sort of explains that. And I also wanted to have the attitude of like, well, what about people who grew up in Palomar and didn't like it? So I wanted to have that angle in it, but at the same time, I didn't want to trash the entire history of Palomar. I didn't want to say, well, this is what it was really like. They really hated it. It was really miserable. It was a terrible place to be. I didn't want that, but I wanted a character to feel that. So I had one of the characters actually expressing that, and so those feelings got into the script of the film, and that's why they're in there. But it's revealed that no, that's just one person's feeling. Everybody else feels how we all feel about Palomar, good or bad, whatever. So that was it. It was just things that were just falling together like that. I don't want to continue doing stories like that because it gets too, there's too much of an artifice to it, you know. I wanted to do it this time. There probably won't be other versions of Palomar movies, you know, unless it's mentioned, you know. Oh, did you see that other Palomar movie? You know, I won't go through like a 38-page story to express that story.
Right.
It's basically the story. The movie version is basically. You know, I'm spoiling this if you haven't read it, but you know how one of the characters had a problem with the sheriff in Palomar, and we didn't know that until she expressed her feelings in the script of this movie. You know, and that's like a sort of new revelation. But like I said, I don't want to go. I'm not doing this to trash the past. I'm just having a different angle from a different character. You know, so that's not my feelings of Palomar. It's a character's feelings.
Because when you earlier described how you know, the reaction of people in Palomar was just like, you know, it's just where we live, it's just the way it is, you know. You want to see the ghost tree and the hammer and all these sort of landmarks of like the glories of Palomar gone by, but it's just the way it is. Like I couldn't help but feel like that's you speaking almost, like, you know, oh, yeah, they were good stories, but you know, I'm a different person now.
Like I said, I don't want to trash the past. I don't want to make it seem like this wasn't that big a deal, because it was a big deal to me. It made my life, basically, doing Palomar, you know. So, whereas the movie version is only in this issue, later on I will have the character exploring, the younger girl exploring Palomar. Like, I don't believe it. I don't believe the movie. I don't believe that those bad things were the most important thing. Those bad things, feelings that you have. She's going to look for what was good about it, and that's what her journey is. To you know. So there will be more stories of her, you know, being in Palomar, but finding out what Palomar really was. You know, at least that's my goal right now.
I don't know if I'm just, you know, in the habit of reading things into the stuff that you say or the stuff that you put in your comics, but I actually have a hard time thinking of another like cartoonist at your level who, I just feel like there's almost a relentless element of like reacting to your own critiques of your own work, reacting to other critiques of your work that pops up every once in a while. You know, and I think the movie element that you've been working with for the last few years, where one of the characters, Fritz, who's Lupa's sister, appears in these B-movies, you know, she's well endowed, let's put it that way, and you know, people react sort of very negatively to that, just on the looks alone. And she talks about critics in response with like Peepo and people like that. Every time I read that, I'm like, is that, you know, am I getting a message as a critic here?
No, that's just you know, making the characters' feelings more intense for me. It's taking a small truth and just expanding on it. I know, because Love and Rockets, for the most part, is enjoying critical success, for the most part, you know. Yeah. So I don't have a problem personally, but I know people who do. I know people who've gone through everything they did is just trashed. You know, this is the worst movie ever made. This is the worst comic. These comics are terrible. But these are people who just, you know, everybody has feelings. Everybody feels crummy when they're rejected. So I just simply had two of the characters, Fritz and Peepo, people who produces Fritz's movies. I just upped the negativity from them. That they're never any good. Critics always hate them. You know, it's sort of just a dramatic device to make things amusing. Like I said, there's probably a drop of truth in it, but very small for me, because I have enjoyed mostly the response from this, you know. So I just, you know, exaggerate. And it's more fun to have somebody making bad movies than making good ones. It's just boring. Oh, he's a genius. That's it. More story over. Well, if they continue making bad movies, they can talk about it. I don't know. It's more of a dramatic device for me. It's more humorous.
But that's interesting too, because you actually make the bad movies. You know, a whole part of your, you know, output for the last like half decade or so has been making standalone graphic novels that adapt, quote unquote, the bad movies that Fritz stars in.
And that's another challenge. It's like, is this a bad movie? See, that's the thing. See, we don't, you know, no critical, you know, appraisal of a film is written in stone. You know, you hear this is the worst movie ever made. This is a beautiful set of critics, and then every once in a while you pull out a review and they'll say, this is a great movie. You know, it's just misunderstood. So that's what I'm kind of doing. I'm just trying to make. I didn't do the cover. No, actually, I designed the cover. I designed it, and it was painted by the guy. He did the painting of Uma Thurman in Pulp Fiction. In Pulp Fiction, if you see John Travolta at Uma Thurman's house, he's staggering around and he leans toward, he's making himself a drink, and there's a painting of Uma Thurman. And I happen to know the artist who painted that, so this is a very rare piece. But, anyway, that's all. Yeah. So those books doing like, are these bad movies or are they just called bad movies? Right. See, for me, I like a strange experimental film, and that's where I'm kind of going with those stories. I'm trying to split that from Love and Rockets, but they keep overlapping for the moment. It's just my Mr. Hyde. When Dr. Jekyll works at Love and Rockets, Mr. Hyde is doing these. So, you know, I didn't want any restraints because there is a do-gooder expectation from Love and Rockets. Here, a drop of that, and sometimes it frustrates me, and I'm thinking like, well, you know, I really want to go nuts here, but I don't want to lose readers just because of, you know, being defiant. I don't want to do it just to be defiant, you know, in Love and Rockets. So I do my best in Love and Rockets to connect with the readers. But there's a punky side of me that wants to do different kinds of things, because I do enjoy other art that's like that. I like S. Clay Wilson's art. I like R. Crumb's excesses, but I can't really explore that too much in Love and Rockets without it more or less getting in the way, almost. So that's where those books are. It's like I can indulge myself as much as I want and in any negative sense I want, because they don't sell anyway, so I know.
When you talk about getting in the way, do you mean of your brother? Do you mean of the audience?
I know, just getting in the way of me trying to tell a story, more personal story to connect to the readers. Like Jaime said earlier in his panel, it's always really about sharing this with the reader. And you can alienate people, and there's only so much of that you can do in a comic. If you want to continue and have everybody happy with Love and Rockets the way they have been for 30 years. You know, it's really about connecting, and you don't, you know, like, if you have, let's say you have a best friend, and you know, sometimes your best friends you have a lot of arguments with and stuff, but in the end, you really want to connect with them, and you really want to bring out the good things about your relationship, you know. So that's what it basically is. Love and Rockets is a relationship with our audience. And so, if you go too negative, you go too wild, you go too defiant, too snarky, too childish, it gets in the way from the good stuff. Because I could be spending my time doing, you know, good stuff in this stuff. So too much of that crazy stuff in Love and Rockets I want to push away from, but I still have the desire to make basically modern horror stories, crime stories. Really, yeah. That's something I really, really like. And when I was doing the gangster stuff and you know, connecting to Palomar, I never liked the feeling of it. It works because it's connected in continuity to the other stuff. Mm-hmm. But that's the only way it works for me, because otherwise it doesn't belong. It just never belonged for me.
You mean like Poison River?
Yeah, the excesses, the B-movie excesses in Poison River, the hyper-violence, you know, just the over-the-top crime situations going on. I mean, I love that, you know, in stories, but it just doesn't gel with Palomar. That's not what Palomar's about, mostly. I mean, there's been wacky, horrible stuff in Palomar, but it didn't dominate. And so there's a part of me that wants to have a book where it dominates, basically.
One thing I really wanted to talk to you about, one person I really wanted to talk to you about, is sort of the bridge between those two worlds, and that she's the star of those films, and that's Fritz, who's with his sister, and is probably my favorite character in all of comics. And I just have heard comparatively little about her from you or in interviews about, you know, how you came up with her, why you came up with her, and so, you know, really almost anything. So I'd just love to hear about this woman.
Well, she was actually the first character I created that I had in place for. I mean, she was actually created before Love and Rockets. And I just had no place for her, so I stuck her in science fiction stories. Similar to Jaime's Maggie character. Like, you create the character, she can go anywhere, she can do this and that, and I just gave her a sort of distinct look in her features, with the way her eyes are shaped and her eyebrows, and you know, I never had a character with curly hair, so I gave her curly hair. I mean, simple things like that. And I always liked drawing the character and doing sketches and little scenes of what she was doing, but I never had any stories for her. And then when I got to Love and Rockets, I sort of put her away and I did new characters. I did Palomar, and I did new characters, but she was always around. She's always in my head somewhere, like, well, what am I going to do with this girl? What am I going to do with her? So I put her in Birdland, you know, which is my porn comic, and just because I had the character sitting around, you know. And once she was originally just going to be about her, but when I drew the cover for Birdland, it didn't look like her, and I was too lazy to white her face out to look different, so I said, I'll just give her a sister. So, so then there was, Fritz and her sister. I mean, just because, and I go, and in porn, the more women, the better. You know, I'm serious. It was just like, okay, the more naked bodies, the better. But as I started creating, you know, finally putting the character into Birdland, into a story, I couldn't believe how much affection I had for her. You know, just, even if it was just a superficial, you know, what I call an action porn comic, you know. And so I decided to use her afterwards in the Palomar stories. In the Luba stories, you know, she's in America. It turns out to be she's Luba's half-sister that they didn't know they were related until later. Just because, you know, just create stories, just to create some kind of interest, you know. But I never knew who the character was. I never knew. I was like, all my characters have personalities but her. And so I started to work on that. Like, whoa, she doesn't have a personality. I made it that she doesn't have a personality. She has a genius IQ, she's very pretty and all that, but she has nothing going on. But somehow I was still, something about her I wanted to make her live somehow. I didn't know how. So I basically did the old 8.5 thing. What Fellini did is when he did La Dolce Vita, he was all out of ideas. They gave him all this money to make 8.5. He had absolutely no idea what to make. So he made a movie about not knowing what to make. So that was the same thing with Fritz. I go, well, I'll use that. I don't know who she is. Nobody knows who she is. She doesn't know who she is. So she expresses herself by, you know, she learned to be controlling by becoming a psychotherapist. You know, there's a lot of power in that. When you're just, people telling you their feelings and stuff, and she's basically manipulating, you know, the situation however she wants it to go. So that became her personality, that Fritz has always been acting. She's never been herself, she's always in an acting mode. So that's how the character started getting interesting to me, and I started creating her more and more neurotic as it went along, just because I didn't have a character like her. But she would become more and more neurotic and more obsessive about things. She has that body dysmorphia, whatever it's called, where she never thinks she's pretty enough, because her older sisters, Luba and Petra, always got attention, just naturally, men were attracted to her. Well, men are attracted to her as well, but she doesn't see it. She never sees it. She just thinks, I'm not as good as them, I'm not as attractive as them, I'm not as smart as them. So she worked really hard, she has a genius IQ, she's always in good shape. The question of her boobs there's a question of, like, has she cosmetic surgery? Well, that's a mystery right now with the stories. Like, did she do that to look like her sisters, or is she just mind is so whack? So basically, she's a crazy person who acts normal. That's where I'm at with her. Why I enjoy it so much. And then that's when why she's been placed in those movie books, because basically she's finding herself in the characters that she plays.
Yeah.
So every book is really about her, you know. And I'm, you know, killing two birds with one stone. I'm drawing crime novels that I like to do. That's, you know. So I think that's where the characters.
Yeah, I think that's so much of the appeal of her to me, is that we've never really seen in comics a whole separate series of books that aren't real, that aren't part of her actual story, commenting on some other character the way those books do. Like, anytime I read one of, you know, her sort of spin-off B, Z, D movies, you know, I always think, well, this is telling us something about Fritz, and there's no other experience like that in comics that I can think of, where you read a separate comic to learn about a character in a different one, you know?
Yeah, like I said, it was just happening at the time when it It was about, I mean, graphic novels were taking off like crazy and getting so much attention. I wasn't doing any. I was doing collections, but I wasn't doing graphic novels. And I didn't really have anything outside of Love and Rockets that I wanted to do as a graphic novel. So coincidentally at the time, the original Fritz movies were supposed to be in Love and Rockets as short stories. I thought, well, that's not enough. You know, I don't know, I just didn't feel right, because I had a real strong urge to do long stories. I'd never done a 120-page story all the way through. So that's when I started to get ideas for that. I go, well, I was thinking I'll do a movie about outer space, you know. I'll do a movie about serial killers. I'll do a movie about the, you know. So then that started to work out, and that's why. So it's like a combination of why she ended up being that character.
One thing I wanted to bring up with her in particular, showing maybe my least favorite panel in all of comics history, because of what just happened. There's a lot of darkness in Fritz and in her backstory, which I won't spoil for anybody who hasn't come across it yet themselves. But you should read High Soft Bliss. And you know, when I have seen criticism of your, you know, more recent work that says, oh, he's just sort of indulging his fetishes.
Aren't we all?
Well, there's, I mean, A, yes, and B, you know, you have, like, it just seems like that you are so unflinching in addressing the really unpleasant and dark and exploitative elements of the sexuality of your characters and the sexuality, the art that they make, and sort of by extension the art that you make, that I can't understand looking at those books and thinking like, oh, these are just, you know.
Well, we all react to our first impressions. You know, you look at somebody and you like them or you don't like the way they look, you know, the way they talk, like, you know, and then especially with art, it really jumps out at a person. If they don't like what they're looking at, they're not going to like it. Yeah. They're not going to go any deeper to see what's underneath. I started that with actually creating Luba. I knew Luba was going to get certain reactions when I first started doing it on Palomar. I knew the reaction right away. It was like, well, this is sexist parents, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but read it. And then they started reading it, and they all stopped saying that. You know, so that's sort of a thread in a lot of my work, where, you know, your first impressions are wrong. You know, or I'm going to make them wrong, you know, whatever. No, anybody could look at it and dismiss it and throw it away, whatever they want to, as long as you buy it first.
Is there, I mean, you do also stuff that is even further afield than the B-movie standalone graphic novels, like your current Dark Horse series, which is pretty much just out and out chaos in the streets. So where do you draw that line? Like, you know, this is Love and Rockets. This is not Love and Rockets, but it's a movie in that Love and Rockets universe. And this is shooting people in the head for 30.
The kids love zombies. No, I just have extra, like, you know, a lot of these come from stories I planned years ago, like during Love and Rockets. But like I said, they didn't fit. It was actually a story just about a drug war, originally, this story. And I thought, well, I don't have anything more than that for this story. You know, I wrote this a long time ago. It was with a male character, actually, you know, that was supposed to be taking care of this drug war, and he was a super spy and this and that. But I really didn't have a place for it, and I didn't have enough to go on it. So when I had this project came up to do this miniseries with Dark Horse, I thought, well, I got to add something to it to make it current, basically. So doing the zombie thing was really current. It was just making it current, you know. You know, anything zombie, the zombie fans will buy, you know. So there was that, and then the fact that I go, well, I've never really had an adventure type woman, you know, like just flat out super cop, Resident Evil type character, you know. And you know, that was always early on in Love and Rockets. That was always mentioned with Jaime's character Penny Century. They would say like, I want to see more Penny Century. I want to see she's going to be a pirate. She's going to fight aliens. She's going to do all stuff. And Jaime wasn't really going that way. He just wanted to do different things with her, and he used her for different reasons. And that was sort of dropped. But what was interesting to me is the interest in wanting that, though. I've always heard, where's the good adventure characters? Where are the good women adventure characters? And then I would read a Marvel comic or DC comic, and I go, these are written like shit, man. Yeah, of course she's flying around and beating up guys, but they have this rotten attitude and this, you know, this and that. I just didn't like the way they were done. So I thought, okay, now it's time to do my own version. How would I do it? I go, well, I'll just make her like a perfectly nice person who whenever she's in a fix to do her violent action, she's a switch is flipped in her. And she does her business, she does what she has to do, and then once she stops, the switch is flipping again, and she's a completely normal person, inside. And that was basically humanizing that kind of character, making her a little soft inside, but when it came to business, she was just the best there was, That was just a thing for me to try to explore, and then have zombies dying.
Well, that's my last question. I think before I'll turn things over to the audience is that I felt like, in fact, how do you pronounce it?
It's a Fatima.
Fatima. Okay, Fatima. There's like a graphic quality to the action, just in terms of big blotches of black, and even when it's not splattery, it's almost in the opposite direction. There are times when your line is as thin and as sort of clear as I've ever seen it. And having read all of last year I read all of your work in a row. And I watched your environments in particular. Like I felt like in the early days of Palomar, people were always oriented at crossroads, and you could see multiple sort of horizon lines and buildings behind them, and there was a sense that there was this three-dimensional world. And eventually, as time went by, you had sort of people in front of a void. And I was just curious how much, that element of like, well, I want to draw this kind of shape, I want to use this kind of line, is that something that even occurs to you, or is it all story?
Well, first of all, it's always about story. But when I have to approach it, I have to figure out, I'll tell you the truth, I can't draw with a brush anymore, even with a brush anymore. I just draw too small. My pages are very small, very, very small. And the smaller I started getting to it was just because I could put out books faster. This was unheard. Like 20 years ago, Love Rockets, I couldn't put out 20 pages a month. I just couldn't do it. That's not how it works. So when I started doing these projects that actually made money for me to pay the bills and stuff, I knew I had to work faster, so I started working smaller. But the smaller I got, the brush got thicker. I couldn't get detail in it. So I just literally put the brush down and picked up a pen point and just started inking like that. Because that's how I started out. I didn't do the brush at first with Love Rockets. I started out with a pen point. And then, so I gotten used to the pen so much now, so when I go back to the brush, it's very awkward to me now. If I draw very large, like I did the poster for Ape that's coming out, it was fun because it was brushwork and it was a large drawing, but I hardly ever draw large drawings anymore, so I rarely use the brush. So the thin lines are just because I know, I work predominantly for reproduction. I'm not thinking about galleries, I'm not thinking about how it's going to look when it's printed. And that's why the lines are thin now, and it's just, it's a lot quicker to simply do it that way because I have to knock off 20 pages a month now for a book. It's just basic science. This is how it's going to work, best, to look the best.
Well, I'll be happy to take audience questions. Anyone? Yes, sir.
Hi. I love your work. I love your brother's work. And I was wondering if there was ever any sort of, what's the relationship with your brother? Is there like a level of competition? Is there a level of like collaboration? And what's the dynamic between your brother? Both brilliant in your own way. So.
It's as people say competition, I think it's more sense of duty. That, okay, let's say I'm finishing a story and I'm finishing it faster than Jaime is doing it, or the other way around. It's more like, oh, I must keep up because this issue is going to come out at this certain time, this and that. It's my duty to do this work on time. So you forget about being lazy, you forget about stalling and think it's going to take this long to finish it. So, but it's more that because I just feel we have a responsibility to our readers and to our publishers and to the retailers and everybody to get this out in a certain time. Because we just sat around musing our brilliance. We do a book once every 10 years. It's nonsense. We want this to come out. We want the readers to enjoy the book as often as we can get it out. So I wouldn't say competition at all. We don't even think about each other when we're doing our stories. It's more like, I got 50 pages, I got to do my 50 pages. And I know after 30 years, Jaime knows what he's doing. I don't even have to ask him what he's doing. Now sometimes when we get in a log jam of our own work, we do call each other up and just say, what are you doing this issue? Oh, well, I'm doing this, or I don't know what I'm doing. And then we'll just have a short conversation about not knowing what we're doing. And by the end of it, we know what we're doing. You know, so that's as close as collaboration as we get. We just simply discuss what we're doing and then go back and forth. But it's not really pitching ideas, it's just more discussing our feelings. But it works out. And then eventually, you know, we hang up the phone and we look at it and go, oh, and then we just get to work, you know. That's how it's always been. We used to work closer together because we live in the same town. Now I live in a different state, Las Vegas. We just, you know, we only talk to each other about the comic a couple of times before it comes out. And besides, I like to be surprised. I like to be surprised at what he's doing, you know.
Gentleman on the back wall.
Just to get back to like the composing with the pen or using the pen, I was just wondering, could you talk a little bit about, like, it seems now there's less hesitation in your work using the pen, and so I wondered how much of the panel, some of the principles I'm sure are penciled, but it looks like a lot of it's just straight, you know, like you're not inking necessarily like a lot of it's just automatic, you know, kind of no hesitation.
Yeah, I guess after 30 years, I'm on autopilot. I guess I'm asleep. You know, you think about it. You think about laying out, pacing, that kind of stuff. But it has become easier to work with the pen because I don't know. For some reason, it's better for me to push my hand down on the paper. Whereas the brush, you have to be a little lighter, use your elbow and all that nonsense. And toward the end of using the brush, I just noticed my work was just getting gunkier and gunkier, and it just was unpleasant for me to do it. So I try to, you know, path of least resistance. You know, I just let my instincts go. You know, go that way. Cool.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. Leather Markets is probably my favorite comic. And the first way I really got into your hat, what led me to Palomar, was Leather Markets X.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you could just comment on that a little bit, and if you wouldn't mind making a few jokes at the band's expense.
I just got to a point where I just was doing so much of Palomar, and I had started Birdland, and I just was not doing stories about America. I mean, normal stories about normal people in America. And I just kind of thought for a second, just thought like, well, I'll just do like, I'll do Jaime's universe with my own characters. Really, it was like that. Like, oh, I'll just do teenagers listening to rock and roll and this and that. Because I had a lot of, you know, as much of a rock and roll background, you know, growing up as Jaime did, and I just never really used it at the time. You know, I just never explored it directly. There was always bits of it here and there, but I just never had actual kids who liked rock and roll and this and that, punk rock. So I just put that together, and once again, like my stories of the time, it just got super complicated and super convoluted, and you know, just everything piling up on top of each other. But that was the reason for that, just to talk about rock and roll, just young kids listening to it. As far as the band goes, well, apparently most of you probably know the story, but as the story goes, that the band was originally the Bauhaus, and then there were an offshoot band called Tones on Tails, and they were looking for a third band to do, the different members. And they happened to be with Alan Moore at the time in England, and Alan Moore had a stack of comics. And they picked up an issue of Love and Rockets, and Alan Moore goes, oh, you gotta read that, this is a great comic. And they liked the title. They recorded under the title, without us knowing, you know, their first single, Confusion, which is a Temptation song. And then a friend of ours just called us up. She goes, have you heard there's a band called Love and Rockets? We go, no such thing, no way. And sure enough, she goes, yeah, it was on the radio, and it's from a band from England, and I go, wait a minute, what? And I got wind of it, and we're like, what the hell's going on? And then we started hearing about it, and then their lawyer came over to America to settle our discomfort with that. They go, well, perhaps if you worked with the band, worked together. We go, they suck! Yeah, well, Paul Westerberg came up to us and said, hey, we're not going to be called Replacements, we're Love and Rockets. We might consider that. If you're going to be shitty, you're not going to use our name, you know? No, they're not shitty, they're just not my favorite band. I would rather listen to their influences, Eno and Mark Bolan. Anyway, that was it. And then and it was this kind of like, well, we're an English pop band. Of course you must love us. And of course, like, we're not fucking 14-year-old girls, man. That's our title, you know? We're not, you know, and they were like, whoa, po, po, po. So once they were, I saw Matt Pinfield on MTV interviewing him, and he was all going, oh, you know how Matt Pinfield is, how you got it from Hernandez Brothers comic book, the name, can you tell us about that? And they just kind of, oh, yeah, we read comic books. We're Ponzi hairdresser rock stars, so, you know, okay, whatever. I thought that was really funny. I should have recorded that and showed you all, but it was pretty funny. Because they got miffed, and we got miffed. But the trouble is that the rights, you know, overseas and stuff, it's a big hassle. We'd still be paying off our lawyers if we had done anything about it, so we just badmouth them. Our comics sell and their records don't sell even on eBay. But they're still richer than us, so. No, I don't have nothing against those guys. If I met them, I'd say hi and punch them out.
Yes, Chris.
I was wondering, you talk about kind of when you collaborate, especially with Mario, how kind of divisions labor works. Do you get something out of, you know, kind of collaborating that you don't when you work alone?
I don't have to write it. That's all, really. I mean, Mario's my brother. You know, I know what he's about. I know what he's going to do. So I just, when we did Citizen Rex, his one and only graphic novel. I mean, it's kind of a large piece. I was just burned out on writing. I just didn't want to write anymore. I can draw all the time, but when it comes to writing, I'm like, I'm done. I'm spent. I don't want to spend the next 3 months writing, you know. So I just said, do you have anything? You know, anything? And he had an old Mr. X story that never made it to the book. And so we transmogrified it, and you know, he had character sketches, he had all these ideas, and I just went ahead and just started drawing it, and then we started working on it. It's funny because writing a comic is a lot different from drawing it, because I'm at home on Saturday night drawing it, and I'm calling him up, and he's at a bar. You know? I go, Mario, what did you mean by this scene? What am I supposed to draw here? And he's like, what? I can't hear you. Didn't I write that? Didn't I give that to you? I go, no, I don't know what to do with this page. I don't, you know. So whereas the drawing takes forever and the writing takes, you know, a week. You know, it just worked. It just worked. It was just, and that's something I wanted to do for him, because he just really wasn't getting any work out. I just thought, well, here's an opportunity for us to do something together, and it'll have his name on it, you know. So that was it. It's as far as collaborating, it's just. But once I'm done with those collaborations, I'm glad they're done, because now I'm ready to do my own thing. You know, that's the thing. And even doing Yale with Peter Bagg, you know, it was fun to start out with, but that was a learning experience because I'd never done a monthly comic before. Yeah, with Peter Bagg. That was tough, man. It was like, okay, now you have to fit, because you don't, okay, normally a normal person would draw a page a day, say, you know, if they're not writing and lettering it, just drawing it. But with the way the mainstream works and how fast you have to put stuff out, I had to like pencil and ink 3 pages a day. That, for me, that was outrageous. I just could not, even if I was drawing in that Scooby-Doo style, you know, it was a nightmare to do. So I was so happy when it was over, you know, just because of the workload. But doing that kind of work does help me. It just reminds me, working with an editor closer, because with Love and Rockets, we barely work with an editor. It's just barely there. But with DC, a place like that, the editor's always there, you know, and at least my editor was. And so it was always, so I had to make all these, you know, adjustments to just work faster. and so once I did that, the hard stuff, once I got to my own work, it was actually getting easier to do, you know, which I do appreciate. So when I do these really hard jobs, you know, that I have to do really fast and too many pages a day and that kind of stuff, in the end, it works out. Besides the nice paycheck, you know, it makes my own work a lot easier. And it goes smoother.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes, sir.
So I'm curious if Palomar for you fits into sort of the stream of like hyper-real places in Latin American literature as a whole, like Ocando and 100 Years of Solitude, or sort of imagine Mexico City by like Jose Ignacio Taibo and stuff like that. Like, how does writing this imagined Latin American place like strike you? Did it grow out of that, or did you?
No, those guys ripped me off. Especially Marquez used Dr. Doom's time machine and just went. No, I don't know, just working on the same wavelength. We're Latinos, we're Catholic. A lot of the stuff you learn is simply word of mouth from family. Besides school, which I ignored completely. There's just the word of mouth from family, just telling you what life is like because you talk about it. And the whole thing of the magic realism connection was simply looking at it like when you're like 5 years old or so. That okay, you live your life, you go to school, or you go to your a friend's house and stuff. And down the street is a crazy lady that lives there. And nobody knows what the crazy lady does, but some people think she's a ghost and this and that. But you don't make the distinction like, well, that's a lie and this is reality. It's all the same. And that's how a child looks at it. But with magic realism, that's something that continues in your life as you get older. And that's what I noticed with that it's something that you're an adult, but that sort of element still exists. And I just happened to parallel it by coincidence. Because I hadn't read Marquez or any of those guys till Moroccan's 14. Yeah, it was just total coincidence, total coming from the same, sources, I guess, in our own.
One last quick question. Speaking about being Hispanic and Catholic, how early on did you and your brother decide to take that whole thing out? Because there's never any real reference to the character's faith in either strip. Maggie never tells that please to school or something.
Oh, you mean like in a political sense? You mean like how it was involved?
You were probably smarter than you did all out, but I'm just wondering how early in the development did you guys decide, hey, we're not going to touch that at all?
Well, it's there.
History.
It's there. There's churches and then or imagery and constantly, yeah, it's in there. And just the way characters react. I have people praying all the time and stuff. It's just not emphasized in it because, first of all, I couldn't fucking stand the catechism. I had to go to the weekend Catholic school to learn to be tortured by going to confession and stuff like that. I'm just saying that I just didn't want to deal with that. I've had that though in the books. I've had it. I think you just didn't read those issues.
Well, thank you very much, Gilbert. It was a real pleasure.